Hey, this is Nick Romolini, and welcome to another episode of The Blank Page, a podcast about creativity, neuroses, and the intersection of the two. Today's guest is Oscar-nominated filmmaker Sam French. Sam and I worked together on an episode of the docuseries Religion of Sports. Sam was the director, I was the editor. Our episode was about the rise of esports. It was a blast to work on that show with Sam, and reflecting on that time has actually really made me miss long-form documentary storytelling. As always, we covered a wide range of topics. Obviously, anxiety, the indie filmmaking hustle, Sam's time in Afghanistan as a doc filmmaker, also during which time he made his short film Buzkashi Boys, which was later nominated for an Oscar. Being true to yourself as a storyteller, how Sam got into the business, the USC MFA and the benefits of that program, the sort of bewildering nature of working your way up in the film business, how filmmaking rewards age and wisdom, being a stress junkie, being self-destructive, his PTSD after coming back from Afghanistan, the perspective that comes with age, how we process trauma and come out the other side, therapy, masking everything with alcohol, facing your problems, sobriety, showing up for life, success, failure, how we define it. We talk about Sam's roots. We touch on white privilege. We also talked about his new doc, which is about evangelicals and the environment. We took a sort of deep dive into theology and Catholicism and the origins of evangelicals. We discussed the value of faith and letting go. And we talked about writing a little bit at the end. We touch on writing throughout, and we took a jump into writing for the sort of last 15-20 minutes of the show. Sam's in the midst of adapting a fantasy series, so we discussed adaptations a bit as well. This episode was recorded back in October, a week before the election. The subsequent week, I suffered from a panic attack that lasted well into the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning. I wrote out a will because I thought I was going to die that night. I kept clutching at my chest, convinced that my heart was, that it was the end for me. I took a picture of myself in a lighthearted moment and sent it to a friend, and a part of me thought it was going to be the last picture ever taken of me. So I will share that on the show's Facebook page so you can see my deranged face in the midst of an hours-long panic attack. But things are looking up now. Things are good. So yeah, I should also note that the Dodgers won the World Series midway through the recording of the episode. So if you hear wild fireworks throughout and random screaming, it's because the Dodgers won the World Series. As always, if you enjoy the show, you could rate it, leave a review, subscribe so you see when new episodes come up. And the more ratings you guys give me, the more it'll help bury the 1-star rating that one guy gave me for some reason. Which isn't something I've been dwelling on at all, like why somebody would rate the show 1 star, why somebody dislikes me that much and has a personal vendetta against me. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sam French. I really appreciated his generosity with his time and his wisdom. I whined a lot as usual, and Sam offered really helpful perspective and was very grounding for me. I appreciated the wisdom of somebody a few years my senior who's been through a lot of the struggles that I've been through. That's it. Enjoy the show. Thank you guys so much for checking it out. Oh, man. Sam fucking French.
How you doing, Nick?
It's good to hear your voice, buddy. How's your anxiety right now?
It's better talking to you, man. You got a perfect podcast voice. It's so low and mellow.
Oh,
it's nice.
Thank you. That's too kind. It's funny, though, as relates to anxiety. I was just thinking a few minutes ago about it's exactly 4 years, almost to the day, since we last worked together. And as pertains to anxiety, we were at a fever pitch then. The last day that I worked on that show with you was election day. Now, I don't want to get into that shit too much, but, it's crazy. 4 years ago.
That's crazy. And I remember, I went out that night with Martin, and it was a terrible evening. Yeah. God, not because of the show. That ended up pretty good, I think.
Sure.
But not a good night
Sure.
in America.
Yeah,
for
but
sure.
Hey, here we are.
Yeah.
So your anxiety is all right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm actually really lucky. I think I think I realized that I'm much more of an introvert than I ever thought I was.
Mm.
I've always thought of myself as a raging extrovert. I've always the life of the party and everything like that. But when this pandemic hit, I really found that I loved being by myself in my apartment, and really allowed me to focus on some creative projects that I didn't know that I wanted to focus on. I mean, it was interesting because I think as an independent filmmaker, you're always trying to find the next thing because you need to pay rent, you know?
Sure.
And so you're always just grasping out there for, please, someone give me a job. Please, like, will people like this, you know? And you're coming up with ideas and you're throwing together pitch decks and all this stuff. And then when March came around and I was stuck in my apartment, I'm like, what do I actually love to do? What do I care about the most? And I started diving into some really interesting creative projects. So I think that I'm lucky that I was able to do that. And I think that really helped my anxiety for sure.
That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's necessarily true of everybody right now. I think a lot of people are suffering right now. I mean, personally, it's been quite a fucking journey since this whole thing came down. I mean, like panic attacks and, you know, different shit like that. But it's actually really forced me to address some really deep shit that's, you know, laid dormant for a while or been kicking around for a while. So I don't know, man. I'm grateful for this time, and strange as it is.
Yeah. What are you dealing with, Mr. Podcast Host? I mean, are you okay?
I mean, I'm okay today. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't okay that one night last week when I had like pins and needles in my hands, my left hand, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is the start. Like, this is going to go right up my arm, and then my heart's going to go, and this is how I go out. And I had like an hour-long panic attack, during which I thought I was going to die. You know, but I didn't die.
Stuff. Yeah, you didn't die. It's really, it's real stuff. I'm glad you actually brought it up because I was being a little flippant, but I think I went through my darkest hours before the dawn about 7 years ago when I was going through my panic attacks and my massive debilitating anxiety when I was leaving Afghanistan. Right. And so it's no joke. I feel for you, man.
Yeah, it's a trip, man. It's funny. Like, I have some friends who are like, "Oh, you're not on medication," and I'm like, "Nah." I'm like, it's not really for me, you know. I don't really want to do that. Not that I am judgmental at all of people who are. I think that's wonderful that some people make that choice, but I'm like, man, I just don't want to take that step.
Yeah.
Even helpful as it may be, I'm like, I will fucking meditate my face off to try to avoid that like ultimate, you know, last solution or whatever. But yeah, man, that's 7 years ago. I was curious. I wanted to talk, like, you're an Oscar-nominated filmmaker.
That's correct.
You're an Oscar-nominated filmmaker. I mean, I don't know how I took that for granted, like, previous to this conversation. Like, that's a big fucking deal, man. So congratulations on that. Like, that's fucking huge.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah, it is a big deal. And I feel like, you know, I don't let it define my life, because if I did, then I'd it would be the pinnacle of my life.
Of course.
7 years ago, you know what I mean? But yeah, you got to recognize it was fun to go to the Academy Awards for sure. The best part about the whole thing, and I'm sure we'll get into it, how the whole thing came about, but the best part was taking the 2 kids who starred in my film from Afghanistan to LA to go attend the Academy Awards. For me, that was the most amazing part.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So
but bringing it back, because I want to talk about all that stuff, but bringing it back to the anxiety, because I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, stress can be induced through good things that happen in your life as well as bad things that happen in your life. I think that's something that people don't remember or that people forget.
Totally.
And so the biggest part in my life, the biggest stress and the most anxiety I've ever felt in my entire life was the week after the Academy Awards, when I went back to Afghanistan and was like, what am I doing with my life?
Right.
I just don't know where I'm going. I mean, I have this incredible achievement and I have this company in Afghanistan, and yet I found myself curled on the floor, unable to move. So, I mean, it's not, this isn't, dealing with these things in life. It's not just about like, you suck, you're depressed, your life is shit.
Fault.
It's your fault. It's like, no. Life is stressful and it can be it's massive change and upheaval, whether it's good or bad, can cause those feelings. So,
yeah, it's a really good point. Look, I mean, a big reason why I wanted to start this podcast, like the big reason why I want to talk to people about this shit is because I don't think people really talk about this stuff in our business. And I think it's like a scourge of our business. And like, as an editor, the most connected I ever have been is to producers and directors in the Bay when we stop talking about the show for 5-10 minutes and we start chopping it up about this real, very real stuff. And like, I don't know, you've always I've felt an instant connection to you, and I still feel really connected to you 4 years after last working with you, 2 years after the last time I saw you. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you just strike me as such an honest and genuine person. And like, as somebody who, I'm sometimes worried that like I'm so honest and I'm so like raw and visceral, and like this business is like rife with disingenuous people. I mean, or maybe it's not, maybe that's just a fucked up perception of mine, but like sometimes I'm like, man, dude, I just don't know how to play this game. Like, I don't know how to do it. I'm too honest. Anyway, this started out as a compliment to how much of a genuine guy I find you to be.
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. The only reason I hired you is because I liked hanging out with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't really look at any of your real. I'm kidding. I did, but no. I mean, I was at a stage in my life where that was really important to me, and I think you came across as really genuine. So, I really appreciated that. So, no, I think keep that flame alive, man. Don't play the game.
But how do you? I mean, do you find that you need to play the game? And like, is it something that I should get better at? I mean, certainly, like, I don't need to tell people about, my troubles with my home. Like I was up till 5 a.m. with my kids. Like, that doesn't need to enter every single conversation. Like, I'm starting to understand that there is a separation, but like, how much of myself do I really need to like subjugate?
I think this is getting right to the heart of it, I think. And actually, it's getting to the heart of my current journey or my current dilemma where I am right now, my realizations in life, and sort of what the pandemic's trying to teach me, I think, is that like, I feel like we're storytellers, right? And I think I've been trying to play the game, just like everybody else since I came back from Afghanistan. And the reason my film did well that I made in Afghanistan was because there I wasn't playing the game. I was in Afghanistan trying to make a film in a war zone, right? Which I guess people connected with. And I didn't learn that lesson until this year, because I think what I'm trying to say is I think people connect to stories, and that's the stories we tell, but the stories we also tell about ourselves. And I think, I go into a room or pick up the phone and call a friend and say, hey, I'm working on this screenplay about a crime family in the suburbs. Isn't it cool? I had been working on a screenplay about a crime family in the suburbs. And then, I mean, yeah, it's cool. And they're like, what, isn't that The Sopranos? And I'm like, yeah, but it's better than that, because like, it's in my neighborhood where I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. And it's awesome because it's based on my real lived experience. It's not really, I wasn't a part of a crime family, but I guess what my point is, I'm like, what would people want to hear? What do they want to see? And let me give them that, you know? And
Right.
so, and then when the pandemic hit, I'm looking around going, what do I really care about? You know? And what I really care about is I love science fiction and fantasy, just full
That's
stop.
awesome.
I mean, you know, when my mom and my dad would take us on camping trips, I'd be literally reading in the car the entire time, and they'd be, look at the great scenery. I'm like, Mom, there's a dragon and there's a spaceship and it's the coolest thing in the world. I was weird. There's a lot of weird kids like me out there. There's a lot of weird adults now. It's awesome. Being a nerd is cool again, which is great.
Totally.
But I realized that that's what I really care about. So I'm now writing a fantasy TV show, and I want to tell you all about it. But for this point, I'm writing a fantasy TV show, and I love it.
That's
Literally, I just sit down and I write about a dragon, or I write about this sword with ancient runes gleaming in the firelight with eldritch magic. And, you know, I love it so much that comes through, you know, like when I tell people about it, they're like, wow, that sounds awesome. I'm like, does it? And it sounds awesome because I love it. So it's like, I'm pitching myself the story, and this story, I don't really have to pitch myself. I'm just like, of course it's awesome. And so I'm just so excited about it. And so I guess to answer your question about should you play the game? I mean, I think
like being true to yourself trumps everything else.
If you care, being true to yourself trumps everything else. And people really, human beings are wired. We're bullshit detectors, you know?
Right.
Like that's millions of years of evolution. You know, we can read micro expressions, and like,
right.
You know, we just have this innate sense of who is this guy? We always suss things out. And so like, if you're pitching something, if you're trying to play the game, people just know it. And so the first person you have to convince is yourself. And then once you convince yourself, it's easy to convince other people. That's what I'm trying to learn during this pandemic.
Yeah, I feel like...
Are we done the podcast now? That's good, right?
That's it. That's all we need. I'm just going to stop the recording and post this right now. No, I remember that sort of distinctly now that you mention it. I remember you having that conversation. You know, when we worked together, you were 3 years removed from probably what at that point was the pinnacle of your career, the height of what you had achieved so far. And I remember you struggling with that of like, I just don't know what people want.
Right.
And like, I think we all do that to a degree. You know, I was talking to another friend, and she's like, when I started really writing something that was honest, that I really connected to, that's when I did my best work, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard.
Exactly.
It's hard.
It's the weirdest thing about how Hollywood's always like, write what you know. And they also say we want the same thing that everyone else has already done. But then when the new kid comes along, they're all gaga over that. And it's just confusing how to slot yourself in. And so you're basically screwed either way. Either you try to imitate what other people have done, or try to create something new that no one cares about. And so either way, you're screwed. So why not just do what you love? Because then at least you'll be happy while you're doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think there's something that's really to be said for just living authentically and moving through the world authentically. And also, I think you save yourself a lot of grief by not chasing something that you think somebody else wants. At the end of the day, it's just a lot more satisfying to sort of live, you know, your own fucking truth or whatever, you know.
Well, exactly. And I think if you, I mean, it's such a slim margin, you know, it's so hard to make it. Whatever, how everybody's define that. I guess money is one way, success, fame, whatever. It's so hard to make it. That prestige, you know. You know, there are people out there who, you know, we both know them, who are like leveraging, wow, Will Smith loves my script, and then, you know, talk to a producer. That producer loves my script, and then, you know, sort of amassing some sort of critical mass of external validation,
right?
And ultimately, God, what an existence that is. I don't know. I don't want to live that existence.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, man, I couldn't agree with you more. So you finish your master's at, I don't know. I mean, where should we start? I mean, do you want to start like when did you get to LA? What led to LA? Like what you know, how do we get to November or October? I don't even know what day it is. How do we get here, man?
Well, it's funny. I could tell you the story that I sort of have the whole thing down pat because I've done it
You gotta
for
pitch
so
your
many
bio.
people. I got a little pitch my bio,
Right.
But I don't want to do that for you. Well, you know what? Let me just give you the 10-second version. So, I went to USC Film School. I graduated with an MFA in narrative film direction, and I wanted to be the next Steven Spielberg. So I came on out in Hollywood, and I realized it was a lot harder than I thought it was. So, but I luckily fell in love with this beautiful British diplomat who was posted to Afghanistan. So I was like, you know what? 2008, tough to make it in Hollywood. Let's go check it out, see what it's like. I wanted to visit her. Ended up staying for 5 years. And then I started a company doing documentaries for NGOs and aid organizations, did some stuff for CNN. It was great. And my friend came to visit me and he's like, man, you got to do a narrative film. So we sat down and wrote a narrative film, ended up producing it, and I directed it. And we ended up getting nominated for an Academy Award, which is amazing. That was in 2013. So that ended up making me come back to LA. So I've been back in LA for the past 7 years, writing, directing, and making documentaries and, pursuing my dream.
Sounds good. All right. The end.
Yeah. The end.
So you came, did you come straight from, did you come straight from high school to LA?
Yeah. So basically, no. So I went to Williams College, which is a liberal arts school in Massachusetts, and they didn't have a film program. So I majored in English literature with a romantic poetry concentration.
Beautiful.
I know.
And I mean
such
that.
a sappy romantic.
No, I mean it though.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like it. It's good, but it is pretty sappy.
Sure.
Yeah. But no, then I moved to New York, and I lived in New York for 4 years. And I got to tell you, this whole conversation we're having right now about Black Lives Matter and privilege and representation in Hollywood and the industry that we're in and everything is so important. And it's not something we discussed at all back then. But I mean, the only reason I could even possibly pursue a career in the entertainment industry was because I'm a white dude who went to a really nice college. I mean, it's just the truth. And so because my first job, and I called up an alum from Williams, and I'm like, "Hey, give me a job," and they did. So my first job was at the Sci-Fi Channel, working in programming there, and then it was really corporate. So even though it was in entertainment, it was really just like working in a big office building for a corporation.
Yeah.
I thought I love it because I love sci-fi, but didn't really get to do any of it,
Sure, you're just pushing some papers around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so then I left and started doing independent film work. So I was, working on independent film productions in New York as a grip in an art department,
cool.
PA, and all that stuff, which was, an education. And I think everyone should do that for sure, because how we make films is, how the sausage is made is really important to know.
Sure.
And just also, it's really hard to make a living doing that, and I think that's important to realize as well. I mean, it's hard.
What a fucking grind, man! Yeah, those $100 a day gigs, $200 a day gigs. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, $100 a day gigs, and it's 16 hours every day, all in, pretty much, and and you don't know when the next gig is coming, so it's tough. So I was also a bouncer at the time at a little bar on Bleecker Street.
You were a bouncer?
I was a bouncer.
Wow.
And I quit because I quit on Halloween night when a clown punched me.
Wow.
Yeah, couldn't take it anymore. But luckily I was 23 at the time, so I was able to get by on no sleep.
Right.
But yeah, then I was in New York 4 years, and I was trying to figure out, well, what's my path forward, right? You're a PA in the art department, you're working as a grip sometimes, how do you work your way up within the production sort of structure?
Right.
And it's really hard to figure that out.
Right.
I mean, if I want to be a DP, sure, I could, get in the camera department and work my way up that way, but it's, I didn't want to be DP. I wanted to be a director.
Yeah.
And it's just really hard.
That doesn't come from working on productions. Like there's no. You don't work your way up to that. You become a director by directing, basically.
Basically. Exactly. And so how do you make that leap? I mean, it's not easy. And the way I decided to tackle it was to apply to grad school, and I got into USC, and I came out. That's what brought me to Los Angeles in 2002
Got it.
to go to USC grad school, which was great.
I mean, I've heard that the biggest value in the LA film schools are the connections that you make. Of course, it's the education, but I've heard that really it's, I mean, because I went to film school in Philly, and I don't know anybody out here that went to my school, and everybody who was in my class, my graduating class, like I would say 95% of them aren't even working in the business anymore. They're like accountants or something, or whatever people do when I have no idea. I have no idea. And like, maybe, I don't know, maybe this will reach somebody from Temple University 2005 or 6, whenever I stopped going. But have you found that?
Yeah, for sure. I think you going to USC or UCLA, that's one of the major draws. And it definitely, I do know people who, I'm still friends with people who are now in the industry, and it's great to have those connections for sure. And again, it's this sort of privileged pathway where
for sure
it's a fucking expensive school. I mean, I'm still paying off the student loans. But so it's not available to everybody, and I'm really lucky to be able to do it. But no, I think at the time in 2002, I do think that was sort of the turning point where I didn't have access to any camera equipment because it was at that time it was too expensive. So actually going to USC was a logistical move where I actually could then use the camera equipment they had to make films, and we were forced to make films. And so I do also think that actually making 5 films your first semester, was really incredibly useful, just to dive in and do that and be surrounded by people who can give you feedback and where you can make mistakes, and it's okay. They tell you at USC, you're never gonna. We don't allow you, because they actually keep the copyright of all the films you make.
No shit. Wow.
Yeah. It's not true at every school, but at USC it's true.
Up.
I know it is. It's a weird special contract they have, but they basically say, since we have the copyright, you're not allowed to post any of your first 3 or 2 years of films you make here anywhere. At least I think that might have changed now, but at the time that was the rule. And all of us were up in arms. We're like, but this is the most amazing film anyone's ever made. This is the magnum opus. It's beautiful. Because you always think your film is amazing because it's you basically because you've worked so hard on it, so it has to be good, or else your work has been wasted.
Right.
And then looking back on it a year later, you're like, oh God, thank God they made me not post that.
Thank God they own that.
Yeah. But it allows you to make mistakes and learn, which is, I think, really necessary.
It seems like a master's program is way more beneficial than an undergrad program as far as film school is concerned. But then, you got to do your 4 years, and then,
Well, I also think that in film, unlike other avenues of pursuit in life, I do think that filmmaking is a medium that rewards wisdom and age a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I don't know if at the age of 18 I would be capable of saying anything in the world. I mean, I don't know. Just for me, I was definitely a late bloomer, and so when I went to college, I was like, "Who am I? What's going on?" And so I think after college and 4 years in New York, I didn't have that much to say, but I had a little bit more to say than when I was 18. So I think there's that too.
It's funny because had you done it at age 18, I bet you would have thought you had some profound things to say,
Exactly.
I mean, I certainly did, but, had no fucking means whatsoever to actually execute anything, Yeah.
And
certainly the ideas weren't very profound. I think you're absolutely right that it's time has definitely made me a better writer, made me a better editor, made me a better filmmaker in general. I mean, it's just, there's a lot to be said for aging. It's funny because I always thought, I don't know, in my 20s, it was this is life, man, and then you get into your 30s, your mid 30s, your late 30s, and you're like, oh shit, you're only really young for a very small portion of your life. You're old for a really fucking long time.
Yeah. I think,
And that's great.
that is true.
I'm so happy to be in my late 30s now. Like,
I think it is great. I think the transition is not easy I think that I definitely had that transition, of like, oh, I'm not young anymore. Now what's the next stage looking like? But I do think that there's a shift, and I'm just now thinking of this as we speak. So this will be great. It'll be like new discoveries in your podcast.
Beautiful.
But when you're in your 20s, when I was in my 20s, you're all young and full of gusto, and you want to make a mark on the world, and you're burning like a fire, right? And it's exciting, and that's powerful, But I think at least how I transition is like my superpower now is just simply persistence. It's just simply the ability to see something and just continue plodding after it until I get there. And that wasn't true in my 20s. Like, I literally would be like, this is great, look at that shiny object, let's do that, and then do it sort of okay. I did an okay job at whatever it was, but that was it. And then I move on to the next thing. And I think now I'm much more able in my waning years to actually, put the work in and make it good. So I think that's filmmaking rewards that, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's a really profound point. So tell me about Afghanistan. I mean,
yeah,
fuck, man. Fuck.
Yeah, well, I mean, what do you want to know? I mean, basically, I think one thing I always start, and I won't do my spiely thing, but one thing I do want you to know is that, Afghanistan is an incredibly surprising and unique and wonderful place that wasn't what I expected when I got there. And definitely, it's hard to explain, because the news media and sort of the perceptions we have here in America is so skewed of the country. Sure. It's like backwards, and women in burqas, and terrorists, and all this stuff. And it's a country full of millions and millions of people, and it's got an incredibly rich history. So it's not one dimensional like that. I think that's really important to say. But B, it definitely, for sure, for me, was one of the most life-changing experiences of my life, for sure. I think that moving to Afghanistan to follow that wonderful woman to Kabul was definitely the best decision I've ever made in my life. I mean, it brought me a lot of pain and hardship, for sure, but I think I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if I hadn't made that decision. So, yeah, it definitely there's moments in your life that will change you, and will change you, and sometimes you say, I can't do that, and I'm glad I said yes to that one. So, yeah, it was great.
Yeah, man. I think one of the most undervalued powers we have as human beings is our choice to say yes or no to big decisions. And I think that a lot of people maybe don't, or at least I've been guilty in the past, certainly, of passing up on things because I was afraid, I guess, really, is what I'm saying. I was going to fucking go in circles around that, but I think I've definitely said no when I should have said yes. And I'm glad you said yes to that. You, are you like a stress junkie? Like, I mean, I mean, I don't know if I even need to expound on that question, but like working with you, like, you get fucking revved up, man, when you're like in it. And like, I get really revved up when I'm in it too, but like, you were in fucking Afghanistan for 5 years, like making run and gun documentaries. Like, I feel like you have to be a bit of a stress junkie, no?
Yes, I think that's true. I definitely have that within me, for sure. And I think part of my struggle in life is to utilize the best aspects of that and not let that destroy me. if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Man,
for
I'm just being
sure.
really honest with you right here. This is crazy. Do you have some sort of superpower? I some honesty superpower. No, it's true. I mean, I think I do have a self-destructive tendency in my life, and I think a lot of people who go to places like Afghanistan have self-destructive tendencies.
Yeah.
I know a lot of my journalist friends. My business partner, for example, that I worked with together for 5 years in Afghanistan with my company, and he was crazier than I was. I mean, he's the guy who would go to the front lines. I'd be like, have fun, Jake. Get some great footage. I'll be here in the editing room. As soon as when we both left around the same time, and he went to Syria and was one of the first people into homes, and he's just chasing that front line, those front lines.
Yeah.
And I saw him, and I saw friends of mine, war photographers, and all that. Mercenaries and all those kinds of people, chasing that buzz, and right. I realized how self-destructive it was, and I looked back at myself, and I'm like, oh, wait a second. And so I made a conscious choice because it is thrilling. It's like a drug. It's like you're there. It's not necessarily the danger of it. I mean, that fades pretty quickly. We get acclimatized pretty quickly to dangerous situations. So I'm not in fight or flight the whole time. It's not like you're constantly in fight or flight, but there's and I do not want anyone who's listening to this to think that Afghanistan is an incredibly dangerous place. It is a country at war, and it's been at war for a long time, and that's caused terrible, untold suffering amongst the Afghan people. But there's a lot of people who write about Afghanistan in a very sensationalist way. And I don't want to be guilty of that. And so, my life wasn't in danger every day. It's, I wasn't dodging bullets when I left my house. I was living in a small, nice little house in a nice residential neighborhood. And I had wonderful Afghan neighbors, and I would have breakfast at the tea house next door. And, I would have parties at my house that, people came to, and it was a wonderful time full of laughter and merriment, mostly. Right. At the same time, you are living in a war zone. You are trying to, make something in the world. I think there's an importance placed upon the work that wouldn't be here if you're just trying to make a rom-com in Hollywood.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's that weight which feels good.
Right.
But it's also a burden. And so after, so I was definitely living at a level of stress, self-imposed stress and external stress for 5 years. And you get used to it. You're like, this is the new normal. And then I saw my friends, trying to like a drug, trying to up the dosage,
Sure.
And I was like, that way leads madness. Right. So I tried to come back to LA, and I got to tell you, trying to make that transition back to Los Angeles was probably the hardest time I've ever experienced in my life. It was, not easy. There was a lot of issues with PTSD, and by PTSD, I don't mean, diving under a desk when I hear a loud noise. It was like realizing that nothing can be as important or seemingly important as what I was giving up, and the vapidness of the conversations I was hearing around me, right. And that would cause great anger within me.
Right.
The anger was caused not by justified anger, but by a deep sadness.
Right.
That, of the poverty I'd seen, and trying to process that, and trying to understand how I, as a white man who grew up in a really rich suburb in Philadelphia, can exist in a world where, there are kids with their legs blown off. And I get to come back to LA when I want to, all of that's wrapped up in that, what I call the PTSD. Yeah. So it was a really, really tough time in my life. And I literally had just gone to the Oscars, and it was, it was tough. So I don't know what the whole question you asked me, but I sort of meandered to there.
It
That's great.
Doesn't really matter. That's fucking powerful stuff, man. I mean, how could you come back and then have to have a conversation with somebody about you know, the art department on a Maybelline commercial or something, you know, some commercialized capitalistic pursuit.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I think, you know, I definitely want to keep the focus. It's hard to talk about this kind of stuff because, you know, it's like, boo hoo me, you know, I'm stressed out, you know?
Yeah, but I think I'm sorry to interject, but personally, like, of course, like, I think that everybody's experience is relative to them. And I think you can do yourself a disservice, the royal you can do yourself a disservice if you discount your experience as not mattering enough or not being important enough or trivializing your problems because that kid had his legs blown off, you know? I mean, and that, I understand the instinct to do that, but, and I'm going to get fucking super hippy dippy here, but like, your shit matters too. Your PTSD was really fucking real for you.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
It's true.
I don't mean to overstep, and I'm not trying to like trample what you're saying, but I do think it's important that like your experience matters, man.
All experiences matter. No, let's not go there. That was in poor taste. I didn't mean to link it. I don't know. It's like, that's how I feel though. I feel like, in a way, in this conversation that we're having, you know, during the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's like, I don't want to focus on myself. I want to, like, you know, use whatever privilege I have in my life to try to shift the conversation to the people who haven't been given a platform, you know, and just, and so I honestly do feel a little uncomfortable. And this is what's weird about this, is that if you had asked me this question 7 years ago, man, I would expound. You would be listening to me talk about my PTSD and all my experiences in Afghanistan, and, you know, how I was like hanging out with the Afghan National Army in the front lines, you know, was there fighting the Taliban, and oh man, isn't that awesome? And it, like, I would go off on all this stuff 7 years ago, and, you know, I think inside of me, my focus has shifted. I don't think it's as important as other things in the world right now. My experience, honestly. You know?
Pardon whatever is happening in the audio because the Dodgers just won the World Series, I think.
I was going to say, I'm under my table because there's fireworks going off outside. I'm now speaking to you from underneath my table, and I'm freaking out.
Because of your PTSD that doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
But no, I think you're a little bit older than me, and I think maybe what you're describing just speaks to maturity and speaks to where you are in your life right now. You know, I mean, I'm hearing you talk, and I'm like, man, that's like, I don't know. All I want to do is talk about how fucked up I am, and like how I have all this shit from my childhood that I'm trying to work through, and I have all this shit from my 20s that I'm trying to work through. Like, and I don't know if that's just like, maybe it's just like narcissism. Like maybe I'm just like an embarrassing narcissist. Poor me. Yeah.
No, and I don't think, I do agree with you 100% that everyone's experience, like, you exist inside of your skull, right? And your heart, and there's no way that you can actually get out of the prison of your body. And so, like, yeah, no, it's really important to make that a comfortable place to live.
Right. It's like, until that's an okay place to be, how can anything else be coming from a place of purity, or, you know?
Right. And I think that might be what I'm trying to say, is that luckily I think now I am in a good place in my life, you know? And so I don't feel the need to sling it out. You know, I was externalizing all of my pain back then, for sure. I was saying, I was almost yelling it out, trying to make people hear me and see me, you know? And honestly, I lost some friends during that time because I was honestly a little bit of a crazy person. But yeah, no, I'm in a much better place in my life now, and I think I did go to therapy, and I think this year I think I have turned a corner a little bit. So I'm able to really look outward again in a way. Aren't I? I mean, aren't I awesome, Nick?
I love therapy. I do. I actually think you're awesome. I actually find, I mean, I think that there are very few truly genuine people, and I don't know, you're a sensitive guy, you're a kind guy, you're a big-hearted guy. I've always felt a really strong connection to you as a very sensitive person who's like spent my whole life like trying to find a fucking big brother, somebody who I could just like fucking just accept me, man. I'm like, I'm good, right? Like I got this, right? And I've always, I don't know, I've always been a really good guy, but
well, thanks, man.
No, man, fuck yeah. Therapy, please give me all the therapy so I can fucking just be okay with who I am in the day to day.
Yeah. One of the things the therapist did say to me when I came back from Afghanistan, because I didn't know what was happening to me. I mean, I've been really lucky in my life, really lucky that I had a really good upbringing, and I had a really wonderful, loving family.
Yeah.
And I think that foundation has really served me well, and it was an awakening to me to see how rare that was in the world.
Right.
And I think I'm really thankful for how my mother and father raised me. But I think after Afghanistan, I definitely was self-medicating with alcohol for sure. And I think the first thing my therapist said to me, I came in and I'm like just unloading on her and tried to explain all these issues that I touched upon very briefly here. She's like, I can't help you until you stop drinking. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And she said, well, you're just trying to paper over everything. You're just covering it up and running away from things. And I don't think any therapist has ever said, go, like, stop coming to me. But that's what she did. And she was right, and so I think, that sort of, luckily I've gotten a handle on that aspect of my life, which is great. So I think for me, it's facing, like you say, facing your problems and not running away from them. And for me, the way I ran away from it was to drink, that to deal with my PTSD issues from Afghanistan, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you want to get into this, but I actually stopped 5 months ago, about like full sobriety, no more booze.
Yeah.
No weed, nothing. I mean,
that's great.
Yeah, and I don't know if it'll last forever, but in this season, it's really serving to help me get some real fucking clarity on what's underneath the issues and the reasons why here's where I am at age, 36. Like, where could I have been if I didn't, self-medicate for so long?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one reason I brought that up, is because I think last time I talked to you, you were saying that you were doing that, and so I think it's really important. I mean, I think everyone should at least see what it feels like to be 100% sober in life. It's and show up for life. It's good, especially with you as having your family. I think right now, I'm proud of you, man. That's great.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's funny because it definitely changes, when you have a family. So, I mean, it wasn't, age 23, like blacking out and, waking up for brunch Sunday afternoon to drink all day. But, it was still having an effect on how I was able to move through the world and how I was able to engage with the world and engage with my own feelings, and
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And it's not just about the being drunk or the dealing with the hangover that's the problem. It's the alcohol is a poison, and it does change the way your brain functions over time.
Yeah.
So it's I think, and it's just, and it is about showing up for life. It's like, I think this is something that I'm really trying to understand now in my life, and especially now during the pandemic. But I think we talked about it earlier this week, but the idea of being a success or being a failure in life, or how you define that or what that means. I think it's related to the stories we tell ourselves, the how we pursue the projects we're pursuing, and I think it's relevant in a way. Well, definitely relevant in my life right now. I've been thinking a lot about it this week, and in my cold, clear, crystal sobriety, how
there's nowhere left to go. When you stop drinking, there's nowhere left to fucking go.
There's nowhere left to go.
There's nowhere to go, and especially in the pandemic, there's nowhere to hide anymore. Sorry.
No.
Sorry, but it's fucking crazy, dude.
I know. It's crazy. It really is. But it's also, and so it's not easy, it's not easy. But I tend to think of it as like, it's not what you're putting down, it's what you're picking up. What are you trading for it, right? You're trading you're trading the certainty of going down a path that you've gone down. I can't speak for anyone else, but you've gone down, your entire life. Like, you've gotten to a point. And for me, that point was lying on my floor, not able to move, trying to figure out what the hell to do with my life, and not understanding how to deal with any of my emotions, and just going, okay, well, I can go down from here. That's terrible. You put down that life, that downward path, and you pick up the possibility, not the certainty, but the possibility that there might be something awesome out there. So,
fuck yeah, man.
That's how I'm looking at it.
That's a great perspective. So, with this breath I fly, 10 years you've had a documentary in post-production, right? Or 10 years you've been working on a documentary.
Yeah.
I gotta start with asking, how do you possibly sustain work for that period of time? Like, for me, and I love documentary storytelling, I love doc filmmaking, and I just want to be done at a certain point, So tell me about the process of this. Tell me about it.
So yeah, I guess 10 years of my life working on this documentary. And, to be clear, it wasn't 10 years, 40 hours a week.
Of course.
The process is taking 10 years. I think that's important, because every time I hear a story like that, I'm like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
I'm just slaving away in a dungeon somewhere, for 10 years of their life. It's not the case. There's been a lot that's happened in my life.
Yeah, even asking that question and then having this moment to reflect on that, it's actually kind of amazing, because it's always been a part of your life, and it'll come back into your life and you'll be working on another project, but this thing is always sort of there. Maybe I completely understand how you've been working on it for 10 years. Maybe it's fucking awesome.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should tell you sort of what the film is real quickly.
Please.
I'll give you the little, this story could take half an hour, but I'll give you the short, real short version. So basically I'm in Afghanistan, and I team up with this amazing, these two amazing women, Leslie Knott and Clementine Malpass, to make a film about women's rights in Afghanistan. And the European Union was funding they wanted to make a film about women's rights. So we pitched them an idea of making a film about women who've been imprisoned in Afghanistan for moral crimes, which is a big problem in Afghanistan. You know, in 2001, the international coalition ousted the Taliban from power, and we wrote a constitution with the Afghan government, a new one, which enshrines women's rights. And we sort of instituted this constitutional system of law in the country. So there's courts and there's judges and all this stuff that follow that law, but it's also a country that's very tribal and very traditional. So a lot of times the courts will actually follow tribal law, not necessarily Sharia law, but tribal law.
Okay.
Which is slightly different. And I don't want to get into all of the distinctions, but basically, so if you're a woman in Afghanistan and you run away from your husband, for example, you could be in prison for running away from your husband, even though divorce is legal under the constitutional system, or if you're raped by someone, you can be in prison for adultery.
Wow.
As a woman.
It seems
so we wanted to,
unjust, dare I say.
Our original working title was Injustice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is very unjust.
That's fucked up.
But,
wow.
So we the European Union gave us money to make this film. We found two women in prison who had already been in prison in Afghanistan for these moral crimes. One was this woman named Gulnaz, and she'd been raped by her uncle, and she became pregnant, and that's how the people found out. And the police arrested her uncle for raping her and imprisoned him for raping her, but imprisoned her for 12 years for forced adultery. That was the charge. And then she had his baby on the prison floor and would do anything to protect this young daughter of hers that she was now raising in prison. And the other woman, Farida, was married off at 13 years old and then suffered 10 years of incredible emotional and physical abuse at the hands of her husband, a man she'd never met, until she finally ran away with this younger man, this army officer who she was in love with. And they were found and caught and arrested and imprisoned for adultery and running away for running away from her husband. So we followed these women's stories for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
But as they sort of fought for their freedom in the justice system in Afghanistan. But after a year, we submitted a cut to the European Union, a rough cut of them sort of getting to that point in the story of being in prison and not knowing what to do with their life or what to do. And the European Union decided to shut down the production and shelve the film, basically. And we didn't understand why. And it came to light that they were worried about the safety of the women, which is understandable because if you speak out as a woman in this society, you're putting yourself at great danger. You're already in danger from your family and for the shame of the dishonor of what you did or what they say you did. But if you speak out about it, women are oftentimes killed for the shame of that dishonor. So
right.
Valid concern, but we obviously told the women, they knew more than we did how much danger they were in, and we were very clear about what the film was, and they were very eager to tell their stories. That was why they were doing the film, is to explain their situation so the world would understand what was going on. And so the European Union didn't agree, and so they sent representatives into the prisons to try to convince the women to withdraw their consent from the film, which the women refused to do. And then we realized actually that wasn't the real reason. And the real reason was because the European Union headquarters in Brussels was worried that the film would reflect badly upon their support of Afghanistan's judicial system, because they gave billions of dollars to Afghanistan to run their court system and prisons. And so this, the human rights section of the European Union funded our film, and then the big boys came in and said, whoa, don't do that. So they tried to shelve the whole film. And we realized what was happening. And so they actually ordered us to delete all of our footage. We've been filming with these women for over a year. And of course, we were just incredibly incensed at that injustice to us, but way more so about the fact that the European Union would try to silence Gulnaz and Farida's voices,
right.
who had been so courageous in speaking out. So So we were not willing to do that. So we actually went to the international media who picked up the story, and it became international news, and Gulnaz became the face of women's rights in Afghanistan for a brief time. And then my friend Kim Motley, who's an international human rights lawyer, decided to represent her and ended up taking her case all the way to the top to President Karzai, the president of Afghanistan. And he ended up issuing a presidential pardon to Gulnaz, and she got out of prison. And after that, the European Union had to relent, and they assigned the copyright to us of the film. And so we were finally allowed to keep filming. Of course, at this point, we had run out of money. My company producing the film is like, I'm going into debt, paying for lawyers, and it's like we just have no resources whatsoever. So we do end up finishing the film, or finishing filming in Afghanistan on credit cards and all this stuff. But this is all to say, this is one reason it's taken 10 years, is because we just, after this whole process, we're just absolutely exhausted. And we all left Afghanistan. I was going through my PTSD thing, and it was just a mess. And so we took about a year off, and then ended up picking it back up again. And I ended up doing some fundraising through Indiegogo and raising enough money to, get an edit together with an editor, and going from there slowly trying to piece the story together over the course of the next 4 years, basically, just as we could. It was not easy. But I guess to answer your question, which is why was I working on it for so long? Because of the women in this instance,
right? Yeah,
these women who had just had such courage to open up and tell us their story, and their stories didn't end happily. I don't want to ruin the film for you.
Sure.
Because it's come out, it's going to be great, but unfortunately, their stories didn't end happily. But it is a thrilling ride, and it's perhaps the external factors of their stories didn't end happily, but the fact that they were able to speak their truth, I think, is a victory in and of itself.
Right.
Which is why I'm calling the film "With This Breath I Fly." And so you have to see it when it comes out. But yeah, it's taken us this long to get to where we can finally, we have an edit. It's not finished yet. It's almost a lock picture, but it's enough to submit to Sundance and the major festivals. So, which is what we're doing right now.
Sounds amazing. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah,
I really can't wait to see it. Yeah. Wow.
Well, it's pretty good. And to talk about to also talk about how, what we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, about how telling the truth is the most compelling thing.
Right.
I think for 10 years, I had been editing basically off and on myself, but we had 4 editors on the project. When we could hire editors, we had enough money, raised enough money to do so. But I've been doing a lot of the editing myself and trying to tell the story of these 2 women who'd been imprisoned and how they, got out. And part of that story is Gulnaz on the front page of the New York Times, and this international human rights lawyer representing her, and Farida's husband agreeing to give Farida a divorce to enable her to get out of prison, which is the ending of her story. And I'm trying to tell the story, and I just couldn't tell it. It just did not work. You're looking at the cut, and you're like, wow, that's interesting, but what?
Right.
Like it just wasn't working. And then finally, this past year, when March happened and the pandemic happened, I huddled together with Leslie and Clem, and we're like, okay, we have to tell our story. We have to tell the story of what actually happened. Right. Because if we don't tell, and that's why I told you the story just now, is if we don't tell that story about the European Union, then it's not truthful. And the audience understands that, even if they don't know what they're understanding, they know something's wrong and off about the story. And so once we decided to do that, it was like opening up a window and letting sunlight in, and the story clicked. And all of a sudden, the turn that happens at the midpoint of the film is the European Union shutting down the entire production. All of a sudden, it becomes it basically makes sense. that makes the women's stories make sense. How did Gulnaz get on the front cover of the New York Times? Well, because we're there, these white people in Afghanistan,
Right.
and we call the New York Times. That's how she got on the cover of the New York Times. That's important to tell people,
Right.
But it also, opens up a little bit more of a layer to the story about how, international involvement in Afghanistan affects the people living there. So anyway, my point is, once we decided to actually tell the truth and be honest about things, then it just made the story have much more integrity and connect, I think, a lot better. So
yeah, how could you? I mean, yeah, you can't really skirt that. I guess try as you may have.
Tried, yeah.
I'm sure, but yeah, it becomes an even more densely packed. I mean, now you're seeing the root cause of the deep injustice of it all.
Yeah.
And it's the moneyed white interests.
Yeah.
That allow all of it to persist. But that's not what this podcast is about, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be clear, it didn't cause the injustice, the original sin of why these women are imprisoned. That's thousands of years of tribal culture. But, I think it illuminates the limits of the good that people are trying to do. I don't know, in a really depressing way. The fact that the European Union would try to just squash this film because of political, and they had good intentions. They're like, well, we don't want the public to. They were basically saying it's more important to make sure that the Afghanistan's judicial system is seen as working than it is to tell these two women's stories.
Right.
So I can understand their perspective, but at the same time, it's like, that's not my job.
It's not working.
No, and my job is to illuminate that. That's why I love being a filmmaker.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very excited to see your documentary. And
well, thanks,
man. It's at this point in the conversation, I'm like reflecting a little bit, and I feel a little bit humbled, I guess, by what you were saying earlier, and I feel like this, I mean, listen to the shit you're doing. Like, the shit you're doing really fucking is impactful and really fucking matters. And I feel a little bit selfish for the fact that I want to go down this rabbit hole of exploring, my neuroses and how it informs my work, or how it cripples me from doing my work, or whatever. And your perspective from being, maybe a little farther down the road than me, or whatever it may be, has maybe brought me down to earth a little bit in that feeling. And then I have this other feeling where I'm like, how much of this is actually informed by your upbringing? I mean, because you mentioned a very stable upbringing, and I love both my parents deeply. And, I'm processing shit right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess, do you think that you're boozing and shit, your self-medication, I mean, you came from a lot of stability, right? I mean, just tell me a little bit about, I don't know, why are you a filmmaker?
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. And I think, let me answer this way. I think I'd love to talk about your neuroses, Nick. So let's do it. But in terms of I do think it's very important in my life and in my story that I had such a loving family and a wonderful upbringing. I think I'm really lucky. I mean, full stop. And I understand that and know that. I was just back in my mom's house for 6 weeks. I just got back to LA. I went back to see her and hang out with her and make sure she's doing well during COVID and all that stuff. And it was the same house she lives in the same house that I grew up in, the same house that she and my dad built by hand a couple years before I was born.
Oh, wow.
And my dad Yeah, my dad was an architect and designed it, and they built it. And it's this beautiful Frank Lloyd Wright-esque house on an acre of property in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and it's just gorgeous. And there's these trees they planted when they moved in. They're now like 100 feet tall. And the maple tree that I climbed as a kid is this beautiful old man in the backyard. And I built a writing patio out of stone underneath it, and I write out there. I mean, come on, it's so idyllic and nauseating,
That's amazing,
but also so amazing. I mean, it's like I'm so lucky. And my mom is a unique individual, and I have to call her out as one of the most positive influences on my life. And I think, she's the kind of mom, when I was a kid, she would, anything I did, she would say, "Samuel, you're amazing." Like literally anything I did, it didn't matter. Like
Right.
that was her response.
Yeah.
And on some level that screwed me up.
Sure.
Because I actually thought I was amazing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
but that's that's like such a gift and a curse to feel like you're amazing and believe that you're amazing.
Right. So realizing that I wasn't inherently amazing, that I actually would have to work for some things in life was, screwed me up a little bit. But it's much better to come from that direction than the other direction, I think.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So much more of a blessing than a curse, for sure. And so I have to say that my mom, and even going back to Philadelphia, she's the same thing. Like I would plant a tree and she'd be like, "Samuel, that's the most amazing tree I've ever seen." And I'm like, "Mom, I love you."
That's awesome.
But, yeah.
What were their vocations?
My mom was an art teacher. She's retired now. My dad was an architect. So
right, you said architect. Yeah, she was an art teacher though.
She was an art teacher. And my father passed away when I was 18, which was a whole other that definitely affected my life. But
wow.
But yeah, I mean, very artistic family. And the funny thing is, they were sort of came of age in the 60s, and met and got married in the 60s. They went to Peace Corps in Peru in 62, I think it was, and then came back in 64, and it was the whole hippie revolution and all this stuff, and they're such squares, squares that they're hippie adjacent. They have hippie friends, but they themselves are very sort of suburban Philadelphia, straight-laced people, very waspy.
Is that where they were from? Were they both born in the Philly suburbs?
Yeah. My family, Nick, came to America in the 1600s on both sides.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And sort of settled in Philadelphia or outside of Philadelphia.
So you're like deep wasp roots.
Deep wasp roots. We have our own burial ground and everything. So it's and we're not rich. I mean, working class people. We were textile manufacturers and stuff like that, and not the elite of the elite for sure. But but definitely, some deep roots of white privilege in the suburban Philadelphia environs for sure.
Right.
So
and generations of being in an area just sort of breeds a certain level of stability. Yeah.
Exactly, which I didn't realize until later in life, and it's definitely a realization. But I think that definitely helped me the way I am. I mean, I'm blessed, honestly. Talking about anxiety and neuroses and stuff like that. I am really blessed with I don't have a natural inclination to anxiety and depression. I don't.
That's amazing.
My natural state is optimistic and positive, and I think that does come from my mom, and that's why it was such a journey for me to go into those depths, and to sort of find myself there after being in Afghanistan and going, "What is this? Oh, this must be that."
Right.
So I get it, and it's also given me a much better perspective on how lucky I actually am. So.
Yeah, it's awesome. But I mean, I think the fact that you're so acutely aware of it is encouraging, I guess, to me, or noble. I can't figure out the right adjective for it, but you could very easily not be aware of it and just be moving through the world as that guy with that background, you know?
Yeah. And I think I was that guy for sure.
Right.
Before, you know, and I sometimes yeah, blissfully unaware. But you know, this brings me to something that actually I really want to talk to you about. And I think this is the idea of, like I mentioned earlier, the success and failure idea. I think the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think it relates to maybe what you want to talk about in a way. Let me just bear with me here for a second. Basically, I had a really interesting relationship with success and failure in my life because, you know, as you said, I had been nominated for an Oscar, and that's legitimately an external great success, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I've only just come to realize this in the past few months and try to figure out how to deal with it. Is it like why am I not at the age of 44 still not at a better stage in my career? I'm still hustling. I'm still trying to figure out where my next rent check is coming from. I'm still trying to figure out, like, you know, I haven't done the feature film that, you know, is win Sundance, and you know, I don't have the series on Netflix. I feel like I should be further along in my life than I am right now, you know? And yes, I do feel like my 5 years in Afghanistan was sort of like someone's like excised it from my life and lifted it out. And it's like a chunk of my life that was just this crazy, weird veer off to some crazy sidetrack, and then try to get back on the rails of my regular life. And it took me some time. So, hey, I give myself that excuse for sure. But I think what I've realized in the past month or so is that, and this is a revelation, this is going to blow your mind, I think I've constrained my failure and I've constrained my success within parameters that I could live with. Now, if that makes any sense, like basically I have taken on only enough that I could not totally fail,
of course,
and not totally succeed,
yep.
You know? And I think, so for example, you know, you write the script and you do a pretty damn good job on it. It's good. And you're like, well, I wrote a pretty damn good script. And you send it out and people say, it's pretty damn good, but we're not going to do it. And you're like, well, you know, I tried my best, but oh well. Or you succeed and you get or you do succeed, you know, you do the thing, even get nominated for an Oscar, and you don't then follow it up with, you don't like capitalize on success. You sort of constrain it. You're like, okay, that's enough. That's as much as I can live with. And I think a lot of that in my life has been fear, like you were saying earlier, right? Fear.
Yeah.
And it's like, what happens if I actually try, right? And I think that's the biggest part. Is like, I try only, I do the best I can, you know?
Yeah.
And then if I fail, well, I tried. I give it the good old college try, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas if I actually like really put my heart and my soul into something and I tried and then I failed, oh boy. Man, that would really, really screw me up, you know?
Right.
So I don't do it.
Right.
You know, and I think a lot of us don't do it. A lot of us are like, okay, I can't put that, I can't deal with it. I can't. So you don't do it. And I think what I've realized in the past few months, and especially, you know, waking up every morning, stone cold sober and in a pandemic and not hanging out with anyone and just trying to figure out what to do is like, well, what's the worst that could possibly happen? You know?
Right.
You put all of your energy into something and you fail. So what? You know?
Exactly.
It's like, whereas the best thing that could happen is you succeed. And even that's scary, to be honest, because then what do? You know, then you have to like live up to that success and do the next one, or inhabit a body and a person that actually deserves that success.
Exactly.
Right. So that's hard, but I think that's something I've been really thinking about the last few months, is that like, and that's why, like I was saying at the very beginning of this conversation, writing this fantasy script, I really care about it and I love it, and I'm trying my hardest to make it work. And it's really scary, because if it does work, I'm going to have to do it. And
it could be the thing, man.
Yeah, it could be
the thing, and then you're going to have to just be okay with you as a big success and what that actually means.
Right.
And you're
go on.
But you're doing all the things right now to prepare yourself for that. I mean, you're getting your mind to that place of being able to encounter everything clear-eyed.
Exactly. And I think that's the most important thing that I've realized in the past, as I've been grappling with this idea. I'm like, oh my God, because if you had asked me 5 years ago, even in the depths of my depression, if you had said, hey, have you ever failed in anything? I would have just looked you straight in the eye and said, no, never failed in anything. Everything I've tried, I've succeeded in. What an asshole. Right. I mean, come on, Sam. Obviously I wrote, like I just told you, I wrote a script that I sent out and didn't get made. That's a failure.
Right.
But I didn't recognize that. I didn't say, I was such an arrogant asshole. And I was like, no, I've never failed,
Right.
Everything I tried, I've succeeded in. And that was a way of just protecting myself from the actual fear. And so what you're saying is like preparing the ground for, and what's interesting to me, and this is going to be like some Zen shit, man.
That's what we're all about here.
There is no difference between success or failure. That's what I've realized in the past. That's what I've realized, is that they're the same. And they're the same because the only success that actually matters is knowing that you've tried your hardest. And that sounds trite, but it's really profound.
I don't think it's trite at all.
Tried it is, and as long as you know that, as long as you put all of your energy and all of your effort and all of your soul and heart into something, if other people look at it and judge it as success, great. If other people look at it as a failure, great. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And
how do you feel? It's how do you feel?
Right. Exactly. And so I think changing that framework and allowing yourself to truly live in that art, for lack of to be pretentious, I think is hard but important. And so preparing the ground for that is the work.
Exactly. Because then everything else kind of follows. And I think that, or I hope it will, or maybe it will, I don't know. But if it doesn't matter. And I think that's kind of what you're saying too. It's like, if the ground is fertile, if you've prepped the soil and you work really hard on sowing the fucking seeds, and they grow and they're beautiful, but they don't like bear the fruit that maybe 10 years ago you anticipated they would if you did all of this work, it doesn't matter, because what's most gratifying is the work. Right. And what's most gratifying is being like okay with who you are and where you're at and the space you take up. Mm-hmm. Not to get all fucking,
couldn't have said it better myself. Exactly.
I get. But it is crazy. Like, I was just thinking about, your Oscar nomination, and like the fact that like you're still grinding all these years later. It's like, at first glance, I'm like, geez, it's like really fucking disheartening, man. Like, this guy was like right at the door, and like, why didn't his career like take off in a huge way? And then, I know I have other friends, like first film into Sundance, first film, like a lot of acclaim in the festival circuit, and it didn't immediately breed the success that we all in this business think it will breed if you get to that level. And so I then really think that it's thrilling that you still do it and that you're still on your grind and that your passion hasn't died at all.
Yeah.
And like, that's exciting and that's encouraging to me, you know, like you were right at the door and you're still fucking doing it.
Well, good. I'm glad it's encouraging because, you know, there's always, it's not easy, you know.
Well, right. How do I mean?
It's a dark night to the soul for sure. But yeah, I think reframing it in terms of it's, you know, if you get into doing this film stuff or anything, any art, you know, for the gallery opening or the premiere, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you know?
Right.
Like, I don't know. I feel like I think the reason I didn't, because I've asked myself that question is to, what happened in 2013? Why didn't I get success then? And I think the answer is pretty, well, there's a couple answers. One is I was totally screwed up emotionally,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
And transitioning out of, you know, shutting down my company in Afghanistan and trying to figure out how to move back to LA, all that stuff. But at the same time, I think I hadn't prepared the ground, you know, like going into it, like that's what we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation as well. Going into a room and saying to someone, I want to do this. I thought I was doing that, but I wasn't. I was going to a room and saying, hey, do you think I should do this?
Right.
What do you think about this project? This is sort of cool, isn't it?
Right.
And that's how I was approaching things, because I was comfortable doing my thing in Afghanistan, but it was weird coming back here and trying to figure out how to play the game, like we say. And so I was trying to do that. And then I think, you know, I just, you know, I'm developing a new documentary now about evangelicals and the environmental movement. And I'm just passionate about it. I'm so fascinated in the subject.
Right.
And so like when I talk to people about it, they get excited too. And so it's not me asking them for approval. It's me saying, hey, you want to go on this journey with me? It's exciting. And that's just that shift is different. You can't do that shift unless you've paved the ground, you know?
Right.
You know, it seems such a subtle thing, but it's everything. It's the thing.
I don't think it's subtle at all. I mean, it sounds subtle and it can be put into very plain words, but I mean, depending on where you find yourself, what station in life at any given point when you decide that that's what you need to do, it's like, it requires a Herculean effort, you know, trite as it may sound. So a new documentary about evangelicals and the environment. Can you tell me more?
Yeah. I mean, so it's so,
because evangelicals, sorry. Because when I hear that, I'm like, well, they just burn it all to the ground, because that just means that Jesus will come sooner, right? And then we'll all go to heaven, at least us, the chosen ones, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, that's actually, you're doing my pitch for me. I mean, that's basically, that's actually part of the theological argument against global warming, or against caring about global warming, is that evangelical theology is an apocalyptic theology. So, you know, there are diehard evangelicals who do very much believe in the rapture, and so anything that can hasten that day is good, including extracting fossil fuels and destroying the environment, for sure.
Wow.
But there's also this really interesting political history about how the religious right got together with the hard right conservative political ideology and basically convinced evangelicals to vote as a bloc for the Republican Party. And part of that was, you know, luring them with social issues and then lumping the environment into all of that, which has now become part of the identity politics of evangelicals in a really deep way. And I found out this history through a podcast my friend Greg did about this guy named Richard Cizik, who used to be the head of the National Association for Evangelicals, and this is what kicked me. It was 20 years ago. Evangelicals almost became the face of the environmental movement. I mean, and it literally almost happened. And it makes sense if you think about it, because God in Genesis, the first chapter, said, I give dominion of the earth to you over the, everything that creepeth, that crawleth of the land, the fowls in the air, you humans have dominion over it. And that should mean that we're shepherds over God's creation, right? And then if you go to the New Testament, Jesus tells us to take care of our neighbor as we would ourselves, and care for the least fortunate among us. And of course, that means protecting the home we live in together. You know what I mean? So, and so that there's a real important theological argument for environmentalism within faith,
right?
And yet it's been co-opted, right? And so, and then I started doing some more digging, and I'm like, wait a second. And there's all these young evangelicals who are like 21 years old, who are going out there, who are raised in this new world of, global warming and social justice and racial justice, and, which is all part of Jesus's teachings,
of course.
And of course, environmental degradation affects those most poor among us, and the minority communities. And so they're taking up the charge in a real faith-based way to try to take care of the planet. And they have to convince their older generation, their parents, who have been steeped in 40 years of Republican right-wing ideology, that it matters. And so that's the fight that's interesting, and that's what that's what the documentary is about.
That's just to hear that, though, is unbelievably encouraging and gives me so much fucking hope, right? Because I think to a man, if you told them that the young evangelicals are actually trying to push a change in their ideology towards actual, caring about the earth and understanding that we're all made up of the same goddamn cells, that's, I mean, fuck, if anything could give you hope on October 27th, 2020. That's it.
No, exactly. And it's a huge generational shift.
Right.
Because you can see it out your front door now, Right. And I think it's what's interesting. All of the young evangelicals I talked to, as I was doing my research, had traveled abroad, and that's also a big part of it. We're so insulated in this country, into our ideological corners, and the news that we listen to, and the people that we surround ourselves with. And as soon as and that's what happened to me when I went to Afghanistan as well, is that as soon as you live another perspective, man, everything becomes so much more clear. And so all these young evangelicals, it's so funny to me when, and I don't want to get too political on this podcast, but it's so funny to me when right-wing conservatives say, why is it that all universities are filled with liberals? And it's like, well, because they learn shit.
Yeah, I know.
And when you learn shit about the world, then you realize that things matter, like caring for marginalized communities and, doing the things that liberals do, like that.
I mean, look, that party has spent decades disincentivizing education so that they can continue to bombard their messaging over the airwaves, and that's all the education that their intended voter will ever have. So, of course,
right?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if we go into politics, I'll explode. But
that's not
too weak to the most important election of our lifetimes. But I think that's what I'm trying to get at in this documentary is that the human brain, it's so fragile, and it can be swayed so, I don't know, fundamentally looking at a faith group like Evangelicals, who define who they are as human beings by their relationship to Jesus Christ, and that can be co-opted and has been so not easily, but so well, so skillfully by the right wing of this in this country, the politics, that it's fascinating to and then to see like these younger kids waking up and going, wait a second, let's actually read the Bible and look at what Jesus says. Dad, you're wrong. I mean, that's huge, So
yeah, man.
I think it's a good. I think hopefully it'll be an important documentary if I can actually just explain that or express that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't know, the religion and the God shit. It keeps coming back up in my life and on the podcast. Weirdly, here and there, you were
raised Catholic, right?
I was raised Catholic, yeah.
Yeah.
But my parents were vegans in the 70s, so like they they fucking like crystal healers and shit, like they were like they were very much hippies, and yet they were steeped in Roman Catholicism, and both sides of my family are I'm third generation Italian American, like so there's all that shit that comes along with it.
Well, let me blow your mind then. I'm going to blow your mind because this is going to be part of my documentary. Are you ready for your mind to be blown?
I'm ready for my mind to be blown for sure.
All right. So not only am I going to talk about, or do I want to talk about, these kids who are trying to change the world, and also the politics of how we got here to this current moment in political life, but I also want to talk about the 500-year-old theological history of the evangelical faith, and it's all and it's all rooted in Catholicism, and it's rooted, check this out, in a papal edict that was issued in 1493, and in that, which is, the date's important because it was 1 year after Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? Who's Italian, just FYI.
Yeah, everybody's aware.
I know.
Fucking guy.
I'm just screwing you. But yeah, no, literally for 1 year after Columbus quote unquote discovered America.
I wasn't calling you a fucking guy, for the record. I was calling Columbus a fucking guy.
I know. But the Pope issued this edict called the Doctrine of Discovery, which basically says if a Christian monarch or his representatives discover a new land, they have the God-given right to subjugate that land and enslave its peoples.
Perfect.
Yeah. And so the Doctrine of Discovery paved the way for, the colonization of America, colonization in general, really. And
wow.
And then that led directly to, in the 1800s, to a concept called manifest destiny, which is,
sure.
in America, we have all the rights to lands in the West because they were granted by God, which actually comes from this 1493 edict. And that gave rise to American exceptionalism, which is a core feature of evangelical theology, as well as this thing called the Dominion Mandate, which I don't know if we want to go too crazy, but this basically it says that we have evangelicals themselves have the God-given right, the God-given command to basically rule over the world politically. And it's a sub theology. It's a sect. I mean, people like Mike Pence believe in it. But it all comes from this Doctrine of Discovery. And so there's a really interesting theological history if you're a Catholic. So watch the film.
Yeah, I'm excited for that as well. And I guess culturally I identify as Catholic, but I was only in the, after school church program to get confirmed when I was 13. And then there was a wrap on, my Catholicism, but it's definitely in there somewhere. But what I was actually going to say is, like, I feel like I've spent I spent a great deal of my adulthood recoiling from Christianity and like, God, Jesus, any of that shit, it would, just kind of send me in the other direction, because it is so wrapped up in politics, and it's so wrapped up in, fucking dominion over others. Like, it's so wrapped up in a lot of nefarious means.
Mm-hmm.
And a good friend of mine is a Christian, and we've had some extensive conversations, and I remember early on it was kind of like one of those things that I just didn't really want to talk about, because I was like, what does this actually mean for him, and what does it mean for our friendship that I'm so agnostic and whatever. And then you get to talking, and it's like pure Christianity at its core is really about exactly what you described in Genesis. I mean, it's really about exactly what you described in the New Testament. It's really about caring for one another and caring for the earth. And that is the core tenet of it.
Yeah.
It's just been so fucking distorted.
Yeah. And that's what's so fascinating to me is that, I was raised Presbyterian, and I refused to be confirmed at the age of 13. Because I was like, screw this. I'd read the Bible. I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But then I went to college, and I started taking a lot of philosophy classes and philosophy of religion classes and all the things that we grapple with as human beings. When we look past the limits of our understanding, we look into that void, what do we see? And how do we reconcile that nihilism, that unknowingness? And like we talked about before, we're trapped in these little meat puppets, and so how do we how do we make sense of the limits of understanding? That's what philosophers have been grappling with for centuries, and that's what the Bible grapples with. And the answer is God. But if you actually read, faith is a really important thing, I think, and faith exists within doubt, at least in my interpretation of it, and Kierkegaard's interpretation of it,
right?
Great German philosopher, is that the knight of faith can only be a faithful man when he has faith in the face of doubt. It's ineffable. It's something that you cannot pin down, just like Yahweh, the Old Testament God, is unknowable by man, and that's why he had to send his only son Jesus, so that we could actually understand what the hell he was talking about, as a bridge of understanding, but I'm getting a little deep here in theology.
Please
but
do.
the all the stuff we're talking about here, like the defining, laying the ground and defining success and what it means to have anxiety, and what it means to have a mom who praises you all the time, and all that stuff is answerable within the structures of faith.
Right.
And the problem is, Jesus Christ was a great dude, and the problem is, I think, is that we're limited in our understanding as human beings, and I think that's where all the problems come in.
Oh, totally.
Evangelicals, I don't have a problem with evangelicals, but I do have a problem with using the evangelical faith to advance commercial, capitalistic right-wing issues like digging fossil fuels out of the ground, which will destroy our planet, and convincing evangelicals that that's what Jesus wanted. I mean, what? So I think it's and that's why I think, sorry to go on a little high horse here, but that's
please.
why to be a knight of faith, like Kierkegaard says, a knight with a sword and armor, to be a knight of faith means you have to be strong in your faith. You have to stand up and say, hey, I trust God to direct me in my thoughts and actions. And to do that, you have to stare into the abyss. Like Nietzsche said, I stare into the abyss also stares into you. That's a terrifying place to live.
Right.
And so if you can have the strength to live in that doubt and to live in that, like, I don't know the answers, but I trust God to get me through. That is the night of faith. That's what we should all aspire to as religious people. I'm not saying I'm religious, but I do feel strong kinship to that concept. And I think the problem is that dogma creeps in and we don't engage with our faith in that active way that we need to in order to become fully realized human beings. There.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Well, there's some Jung quote that I'm going to paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of like, if a man doesn't find faith by his 40s, he's in trouble. And
Right.
I'm, after years sort of just like rolling around with this shit and trying to kick it away from me, like, I'm finally coming to understand that I'm the one who gets to define what God means to me.
Yeah.
And I'm the one who gets to define what higher power means to me. And I'm the only person who's going to let dogma creep into it,
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like it was unfairly taken from me, Christianity's been taken, in a lot of ways commercially. So no, this is like a perfect time to hear you say all these beautiful things. And it's encouraging to hear. I think faith is really important, and I'm finally starting to understand that, which is fucking crazy, and how much it's about just letting go.
Yeah, letting go, right? Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good lesson for all of if we have such ego, in our lives, we're like, no, I know the right path, or just let go,
Self-righteousness too. Like, I know the right path for me, and I'm going to tell you what the right path is for you.
Right.
How
exactly.
fucked up is that?
Yeah, that's what Jesus was trying to tell us. Just let that slip away, Man, it's not easy.
I've never read the Bible, man.
Read it. It's great. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's like, it's screwy. It's screwed up though, man. I'm telling you, it's like, it's weird. It's like, read the book of Ruth, man. It's like you're back in Afghanistan. It's like Ruth is married off at the age of 13, basically sold and raped, and it's like screwed up. And like someone was reading the book of Ruth at a bat mitzvah, I think it was last year. I was like, that's a weird thing to read about. But anyway, the Bible's screwed up. It's like it's a very screwed up document, but also it's lasted so long, so it's great. It has great wisdom. So
I don't even know where to go from here.
I don't either, man. But I think it's really good to talk to you, and I feel like we didn't talk enough about your anxiety.
Oh, I think we talked plenty about it. I think that it's an exhausting and exhaustively discussed topic, and I think we touched on it plenty. My only regret as I look at the fact that we've been doing this for coming up on 2 hours is I really wanted to talk to you about like writing and like, fuck, like, how do you like, when that first idea comes, like, how do you move forward? Like all that shit. But
we can talk about that for a second if you want. I mean, like, you're an editor, right? You can edit it in anywhere.
It's true. And also this can be a bookend. I don't know. This could come after the fucking deep theological detour, which was not even a detour, more than welcome and very much appreciated. So let me just preface by saying that thus far I've written a short film that I directed,
which is good.
What's that?
I saw it. It was good.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
It was a time in my life. And I have a pilot and a couple other, I think I have 2 other episodes that were of this show that I'm working on that was co-written. And as of now, I have about, 30 something pages of a feature. And yeah, so I've never completed a feature. I've never completed an hour-long pilot or a 60-minute, whatever the fuck they want to call it.
Mhm.
And so, I got all these fucking ideas, man. I got shit bouncing around in my brain. Like, I got to tell that story about, the fucking time I ended up on a plane to Kansas City and whatever. I have some stories to tell. I've lived a pretty wild life. And it's not even that. Like, my mom will tell me stories about like her immigrant grandparents, and I'm like, oh fuck, like I think if I could start to put some of these pieces together, I could really write something that is good and relatable and connects with people. But I get stuck at Jump Street, man. It's hard for me to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other. And like, I'm hopeful that when I get this feature that I'm currently working on, that when I get a fucking first draft of something finally written, like I really am hopeful that this is the thing that I'm like, all right, and now I just need to work out my process and I can fucking repeat this again.
Right. Yeah, no, I look, I do. First of all, I do think it's additive. I do. I think it's not like a fluke. It's not like you go, oh, look, I did one. Now I'm back at square one. There's a lot of writers who say that, and that's true in some way. But I think the more you write, the better you get at writing.
Right.
Like, just full stop. Like, it's a skill like anything else. I don't think you're innately... Some people are better than others at, sitting down and writing something. But it's a skill.
Sure. It's like a craft.
It's a craft.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And look, I mean, I love talking about writing, and we can do a whole podcast on it. But I think what I'd like to, I'm all into structure. I love talking about structure, and I can talk about structure for hours, and how, you have to have the inciting incident in the first 8 to 10 pages. And, then you have to have the call to action, and, what is the problem the character is facing that the second act is going to be involved with, and the steps, the rising action and the midpoint. I could talk about all that stuff. I love all that stuff. That's important stuff to talk about. And I think, writers, especially writers for scripts, for film scripts, should know all that stuff.
Yeah,
but there's books out there like, what?
Sorry, I was going to say, I wonder if I should study that stuff more and feel like I actually have a better, firmer handle on that stuff.
I think so. I think it's important to at least familiarize yourself with that stuff. I think it's because it is true that in Hollywood, well, there's a logistical reason, and the logistical reason is simple. It's any script anyone is ever going to consider is going to be read by someone who studied that shit.
Right.
That's just the way it is. So like, there's script readers out there who do coverage, and guess what? They've all read Save the Cat, and they all know the script structure, and so they'll grade your script based on how well you follow it. So there's like, which is screwed up, but it's just the way it is right now. It's the way it's been for a while.
Yeah.
So there's a logistical reason to follow that in some ways, So I think screenwriters should familiarize themselves with the structure of how screenplays are written in Hollywood, just because it's a craft.
Yeah.
But I think beyond that, like, it's also really hard to follow the structure. Like, I know it back to forward, but I still have struggle going, wait, what should happen right now? And how do I make this character do it? Like, what, and so if you follow the structure blindly, you're going to come up with a pretty anemic script that's derivative. It's just, that's the way it is. So it's like, which I have written before.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, this is perfect. On page 45, the midpoint turn happens. Yay!
I did it.
The script is perfect.
I'm going to get an A.
Right, exactly. And everyone's like, well, and the reason they say, well, is because character is king. I mean, it's just, and this is something that I think that this is the one thing I'd like to impart, if I can impart anything, is that everything flows from character, and that's the structure flows from character as well. And
right.
I think that's partly a craft thing. Like, part of a lot of these screenwriting books talk about the external goal and the internal goal, and the want and the need of the character, and how the external goal and the internal goal flips at the end of the second act, and then he has to resolve the internal goal, which is caused by a wound. somewhere in the character's past that he has to then finally open up and understand what it is to heal it, and that's what the third act's about. Yeah, okay, all that stuff that's in the books, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think what really got me going, and I can talk about this because I'm writing a fantasy script right now. And the reason I'm loving it so much, one reason I'm loving it is because I'm allowed to make it awesome because I'm adapting it. I'm adapting it from a novel. And so for the first time, I don't sit there and go, ooh, I got to fit this into this structure thing. I'm like, the author of the book has already done all the hard work about who this guy is. And I fell in love with the character that he wrote, right? So my job is to translate that into film form. But whereas if I started out as on a blank page, right? Here's what happens, just real quick. Ringle, who's our hero, is gay. Right?
What's the name of the, I don't know if you said it 2 hours ago, but
yeah, the name of the series is called A Landfit for Heroes.
Okay.
And it is written by an author named Richard K. Morgan. And he's a pretty awesome dude. He wrote a lot of science fiction, including Altered Carbon and a whole bunch of other books, but he wrote this great fantasy trilogy. And his hero is this gay swordsman, and I love him so much. And basically, his wound is that, you know, in the society he lives in the past, in our society, because all great fantasy and science fiction mirrors the society we live in, being gay is reviled. You know, it's in the society is reviled and punishable by death in the world that Ringo lives in. And his lover, when he was 14, was executed. So he hates the laws of men and laws that he's from a noble family. So he was spared because he's a noble, but he's raging against the world. Right. And so he's very self-destructive because he has nowhere for that rage to go. And that's sort of, I identify with that because of my time in, you know, being self-destructive in Afghanistan and stuff like that.
Sure. But
anyway, what happens is this threat comes back. These beautiful fae sorcerers, elven race of evil demons, basically come back and try to take back the world that was once theirs. And Ringle, our hero, falls in love with their leader and has this great gay love affair with him, and then has to choose at the end of the first book whether or not to, you know, their plan is to subjugate the human race. And so he has to then kill his lover to save humanity, which he hates because they've rejected him because he's gay. So I just gave away the whole book, but watch the series. It's going to be great. But my point is, the fact, I would never in a million years write, if I was starting from scratch, write, you know, and then Ringle fucks the alien demon.
Right.
You know? What? Right. But the way Richard writes it, it's just so perfect because of course Ringle would fuck the alien demon. He's doing it because that's who he is. He wants to see how far he can push it. He wants to destroy himself. He wants to, you know, because it just makes sense emotionally. So you know, I have the freedom to write that because guess what? Richard wrote it. It's great. Right. I love it. But my point is, starting from character, I mean, you know, getting a real good sense of who Ringle is and what his wound is and why he's doing what he's doing. And then everything else flows from that. If he's confronted by this situation, how is he going to act? Well, he's going to act this way because that's who he is, you know?
Sure.
And that drives the narrative and the structure of the narrative forward. I don't necessarily think that is helpful if you're going to get some advice on how to write your screenplay. But
no, it's so funny though, because where I immediately go is oh man, adaptation sounds really fucking fun. Maybe that's maybe that's what I need to do is option something and then just write an adaptation. That's how I'll crack this fucking code, you know, because a human instinct is to look for a shortcut, I guess. But I keep banging my head against the fucking wall, man, and I'm gonna get this thing done and, you know, get another thing done after it. But I think what you were saying earlier about it being an additive process, even on page 35 of this script, I'm like, oh, now this voice actually sounds authentic. Like you're getting repetitions and like some real authenticity is coming through, or like I'm a little bit more confident in the way that I'm writing action lines or whatever it may be technically, you know?
But yeah, exactly. I think it is, excuse me. I think it is additive. And I think, and look, I think you should adapt something. I think I was batting my head against a wall trying to figure out how to write something original.
Yeah.
Honestly, everything I was writing was derivative. Everything I was writing, I wasn't courageous enough to actually go crazy. And what's been so crazy about writing this is that I did a table read last week, just because, and that's also, by the way, something we talked about earlier, you know, trying to do the best. And I would never have done a table read before if I was like, oh, this is good enough. Here you go, try it, read it. You know, I'm like trying to make this as best as I possibly can.
Yeah, man.
Anyway, so I did a table read, and the lines that got people most excited were the lines I would never have written, ever, if I was writing it from scratch.
Right.
It was lines that Richard had written in the book that I just was like, this is too crazy for people to read. Like, it's too crazy, you know? And then you write it and people read it and they're like, this is what makes me love the character. I'm like, well, yeah, that's what made me love the character too, you know?
Right.
But I would never have done it on my own. So like, I don't think it's necessarily that you have to be an original writer. I feel like there's a great skill in adapting someone's work you love. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think I'm a good original writer. I don't think I have the courage or the capacity to come up with something unique and wonderful
yet
out of my own head yet, you know?
Yeah.
But I can adapt. Like, I'm a good reader. I majored in English literature.
Which is amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I wish I had a bit of a stronger foundation. I frankly wish that I had taken my school years a little more seriously. I think I was really hamstrung by, I skipped a grade, you know, when I was really little.
Yeah.
And like everything always came easy when I was, you know, doing third grade math in first grade, and when I was fucking acing algebra in ninth grade, like whatever. And like when shit comes easy, the second it doesn't come easy, you're like, oh, fuck this, dude. I'm not,
right.
You know? And
right.
so like
exactly.
I really fucked up. Like my academia, I could have really used a little bit of steering back towards the importance of it and how to actually make the most of it, because I love literature, you know, and I wish I had a little bit of a stronger foundation that you know, I wasn't just fucking off in my AP English class in 12th grade.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, literature is you know, it's funny. God, there's so many things to say. One of which is, you know, I felt the same way about my mom's praise of me. Like, wow, I'm awesome. I'm the best at everything. And as soon as something was hard, I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah, I'm not going to do this. Yeah, exactly. But the other thing is that literature, and this is what I tell everybody who, this is sort of my I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second, but, you know, literature.
Climb on up.
Literature is a recent invention. The novel is a very recent invention. Before 1800, every single piece of fiction was fantasy fiction. If you think about it, you know, all of Shakespeare was fantasy fiction. You know, there's like witches and elves and, you know, magic and, you know, Beowulf, the Odyssey, everything was fantasy fiction. You know, Odysseus, I mean, not Odysseus, Oedipus, you know,
right.
He's a fantastical figure. You know, so it's like, I think when people deride genre, I think, you know, I don't know, I sort of veered off into my own little soapbox here, but I think humans, and this comes back to the religion thing, I think, as well, is that humans need these mythological stories to make sense of the world. And I think that's what hopefully my gay hero can do for you know.
Well, as long as you follow Joseph Campbell's writings, I'm sure that you will. Which I still haven't read his shit. Man, there's so much shit that I'm like, I gotta read that shit. I gotta fucking, maybe if I read that shit, it'll all make sense. Though I have heard that like his archetypes are very helpful.
I think they are very helpful, and honestly, they do go back to Aristotle, which is someone else I did read in college.
Right.
And he talks about, the archetypal story structures and the 7 heroes, or how many heroes he talks about. But at the same time, dude, all these people were like old white dudes. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there shouldn't be that gatekeeping in this world. And I think it's changing right now in Hollywood, and I'm really happy to see it.
Yeah.
Is that hopefully we can tell stories that escape the structure a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think some of it's hardwired into being human. I do. We're born, we learn shit, we try to do stuff, and then we get weak and we die, and we reflect upon our lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's the human experience. That's also the 3-act experience.
Right. Good point.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think some of it's hardwired in, but I also think that, a lot of these archetypal structures are white dudes. So
I had someone ask me recently, like, do you find yourself concerned that, as a white man, like, Hollywood's making a big push to include other people, and like, I don't know, it's kind of, I guess I was a little taken aback by the question, because I don't ever feel threatened, or I would never feel like, oh, there's not going to be any space left for me. Like, in my eyes, it's just adding more seats at the table. Right. And then the whole table gets bigger, and the table just keeps growing and growing and growing. I don't really think there's a cap on how many people can be at the proverbial table. I don't know if any of that's registering.
Yeah, for sure it's registering. I think it's a great thing that's happening right now. It's a great conversation we have. I mean, I lost out on a job last year because it went to a woman, and I'm so happy about it. I mean, obviously it sucks, but it was great. I'm like, that is the way it should be. At least we have to course correct here.
Exactly.
We have to. But one thing I will say is that I do think there's a danger of limiting, and I'm trying to choose my words very carefully in this climate, but like, I think I can speak on this in a somewhat unique way. Is it limiting what stories certain people can tell? I feel like now, if I tried to make my film that I made in Afghanistan about 2 Afghan kids coming of age in Afghanistan, the question would be, now in this climate, well, are you the right person to tell that?
Right.
Should an Afghan tell that? And I think that's a very valid question to ask. But I also think that, I think 2 things. One is, I tried very, very hard and did everything I possibly could to make the story as good as I possibly could, culturally and dramatically. And I worked with a lot of Afghans to tell the story. I think the story was able to be told because I had access to resources and funding that, I had access to because I'm a white American dude.
Sure.
And so I'm not sure if the story would have been told if I didn't tell it. Right. But also I think, I think there's something to be said about telling like stories from different perspectives. So like, my perspective on that story is very different than an Afghan filmmaker's perspective on the same story, and I think both are valid.
I agree.
And so I think there is some of that going around, as well as like, you can't tell that story because you're, not a Native American, or you can't tell that story because you're not, And I think as I said, there should be for sure some course correction. I think we need to do that, absolutely. But I do think that, I feel like there's value in, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think me as a white man going to Afghanistan and immersing myself in that culture and change me as a person, I think for the better. And that I chose to tackle that story and try to tell it, I think created a dialogue between me and the filmmakers I worked with, and the audience that watched it. And I think that dialogue is important. I don't know. I think if you ask me the question, who should tell the story about two Afghan kids coming of age in Afghanistan, you or an Afghan filmmaker, my answer would be both.
Right.
I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I could probably keep talking to you for a while, and I think that I would like to leave it there. And thank you very much. Like this is like really enlightening, and I could do this shit all day.
Man.
Just to be able to learn from you and your perspective,
Well, dude, it was amazing to talk to you, and I feel like you have a warmth and an empathy and a great podcast voice. So it's great to talk to you. And I really do think this kind of format, or where you set up this structure to explore these questions, I think is great. So I commend you for doing it.
Thanks, man. I'm kind of figuring it out as I go, and it feels good, and I'm going to keep doing it. And I really hope that I really look forward to seeing your documentary, and I hope that you get the Oscar this time.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
And keep on writing.
I will. And I would love to work with you again at some point in our careers, which I'm sure we will, but
I know. It'll happen.
I know.
It'll happen.
Quit smoking. Take care of yourself. I love you, buddy.
Love you too, man.
I'll be in touch.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.